just trying to, number one, get marketing students sort of more engaged with their peers, so within their class, into other years, with alumni, with industry leaders, basically trying to improve marketing students' experience. And we're also trying to get non-marketing students involved and try educate them a little bit about the cool stuff we get to do. So those are the sort of two core things. So what we're really trying to do is build a community and try to shape sort of marketing thought going forward, which should be fun. So if you're keen to get involved, come get involved. So very simply, tonight, the team had a discussion about how to go forward, what topic to choose. There was debate about the topic, and this was settled on probably mostly because my team's full of third years and they wanted to cheat on their assignment. But here we sit with this panel debate, and you can see them sitting there in the front row taking notes. And very simply, we stumbled across this topic, and we think it's something that needs to be discussed, and that's why we've got these 5 gentlemen sitting here tonight. So very simply, we're going to have the panel discussion for an hour, which Jimmy will talk you through now, and then afterwards there'll be drinks and snacks plenty. So that's why Jimmy sits here, and a very capable chair for this evening, and I'm going to hand over to him so he can take you through this panel discussion and how it's going to work. So thank you very much for coming, we really appreciate it, and we hope to see you at all the other events we have this year.
Thank you very much, Simon. Welcome everybody. One of the wonderful things about being at a university like UCT is that on occasion you get to hear leaders in their field talk about very important things, and tonight is one of those occasions. And I think a brief word of thanks is appropriate to Simon and the rest of the UCTMA Executive Committee for organising tonight, so thank you. Tonight's event is a debate, which is an age-old intellectual tradition which allows speakers to pit their wits against each other with reasoning and rhetoric, hopefully more reasoning than rhetoric. And this means a few things. Firstly, the speakers that you will be hearing from tonight are doing something quite brave. They have to come up with concise and sensible arguments, and they have to do it in front of a room full of people. So I think it's probably appropriate while we're doing applause to give them a round of applause as well. There's an element of competition in a debate, and I want to embrace that idea of competition. And so at the end of tonight, we're going to take a vote as to which side wins. You can see the motion on the board. The proposed ban on alcohol advertising should be implemented. Now, what I've just told you about the Oxford Debating Union means that you could have enjoyed a glass of wine and still vote in favour of this motion. Here to debate this motion are these 4 gentlemen here. I'm going to start with these 2 on my left, Tom McLennan and Noah de Villiers. Noah's sitting closer to me. I'm going to introduce them together, partly because they're on the same side, but more importantly because their CVs are almost indistinguishable from each other. They're both business science students studying economics and finance. They both have amazingly impressive debating credentials. I don't want you guys to get too intimidated here, but I will tell you that they've both been picked for the South African debating team. They've coached debating, they adjudicate debates. The only difference that I could discern between their CVs was that while Noah is actively engaged and involved in the UCT Debating Union, Tom is in fact its chairman. And whereas Tom came 3rd at the African Schools Debating Competition a few years ago, Noah came top. So I think it's probably fair to say, I hadn't met these gentlemen properly before tonight, but it's probably fair to say that they are either best of friends or sworn enemies, one of the 2. They'll be arguing for the motion, so in favour of the ban. But let's move on to the other corner. Here on my right immediately is Sebani Ngadi, who's the External Affairs Manager at Brand House. He's a communications professional with more than 16 years of experience. He's been working at Brand House for a little more than a year, primarily covering government relations, if I'm not mistaken. And just for those of you who aren't sure what Brand House is a liquor company which sells and markets brands, and I hope I've got this right, I hope this information isn't out of date. Heineken, Windhoek, Kilkenny, Beck's, Guinness, J&B, Dimple, Johnny Walker, Smirnoff, Archer's, Cape Velvet, VO Brandy, and Gilbey's, to name a few. Joining Sibali in arguing against the motion is Adrian Buerta. He's from the ARA, which stands for the Industry Association for Responsible Alcohol Use. The ARA describes itself as a positive force in the South African society. Its mission is to reduce alcohol-related harm through combating the misuse and abuse of alcohol beverages and promoting only their responsible use. It's important to note that the ARA is an industry association, which means that it's made up of the makers and the distributors and the sellers of alcohol.
I think it's probably quite evident that Tom and I are a little bit outgunned and outprepped in terms of knowledge about this motion, but that doesn't really make anything we say less important. Now, Tom and I both like alcohol. We're not against it. Tom probably likes it a little bit more than me. But regardless of that, we both think here that there is a fundamental problem with alcohol in South Africa. Now, Jimmy pretty much stole most of my introduction, so thanks for that. But I'd like to point out a couple of other things, right, which I think are particularly relevant. Number one, the Medical Research Centre in South Africa has reported that 60 to 65% of deaths on the roads, motor vehicle accidents, are related to alcohol. We think that's fundamentally problematic. We were reportedly by the WTO ranked the 7th highest alcohol consumption in the world. They told us we drank about 7 liters per person. The own study done in South Africa reports an amount that's almost double to 3 times that amount consumed per person. I think it's evident from society, and evident in particular within South Africa, that not only do we drink too much alcohol, but we also use alcohol in a way that's irresponsible and in a way that we don't think actually achieves some sort of societal good. So clearly there's a problem, and what we do need to understand is that we need to start addressing it. I think that we've ignored the matter for too long, and I think this is why the bill came about in the first place. Now, the World Trade Organization itself published a paper looking at a global strategy about a way that we can effectively reduce alcohol use and misuse of alcohol within society. And what was fundamentally important about the study is that it pointed out the most cost-efficient ways to do this, or effectively the cheapest ways to do this, was to promote a ban on alcohol advertising, okay, raise the prices of alcohol, or limit its availability. Now what we're going to be saying from our side is we don't think increasing the price of alcohol, for example, is a particularly good option. We think that has far more harmful knock-ons, both to the companies that I think they're probably going to be supporting here, but to the consumers as a whole, and we think limiting its distribution has very similar effects. We don't think the same for advertising, and we're going to tell you that actually banning advertising is probably going to prevent a whole lot of the harms that we've spoken about earlier. So what does advertising do, and why is it particularly problematic? Well, firstly, we think it's problematic because it endorses this sort of publicity and exposure to all age groups to the idea of alcohol. And what's very important about this is not just exposing them to the fact that alcohol exists, it's exposing them to a culture and a lifestyle of alcohol, this sort of glamour and image that is attached to it. Okay? And we think that's particularly problematic, which ties into the idea of why do firms advertise in the first place. Now, there are 2 reasons. Number one, we think they want people to change from one brand of goods, one brand of alcohol they're consuming, to another. And in order to do that, you need to construct a brand or an image that is more popular than someone else's in order to get them to move from one product to another. And we think the way that they do that is very, very disconcerting, because it promotes this sort of cool and popular lifestyle around alcohol that is so inherently tied to all of the harms that alcohol actually causes. But secondly, what they try and do is they try and get people to drink more alcohol. Now we know that's already a problem in South Africa, and Jimmy pointed out the whole idea of discounts being used at popular festivals to get people to consume more alcohol. We don't think that's the kind of advertising that leads to social goods, but we also think that kind of advertising is problematic because it encourages a lifestyle of drinking more because it's available to you. We don't think firms, socially responsible firms, should be allowed to do that. So this leads us to the entire point of why we think we should be able to ban alcohol advertising. There have been studies done, for example, in the United States, which have been endorsed by the American Medical Association and by Georgetown University, which has positively related alcohol advertising to alcohol consumption. They found that markets when there was no alcohol advertising actually became stagnant in an early age, and early 20s, people in their early 20s stopped consuming a lot of alcohol or plateaued. Whereas when there was alcohol advertising, people continued to increase their alcohol consumption all the way up until they were into their late 20s. We think that's problematic because it means that the problem isn't getting worse and is in fact exacerbated by alcohol advertising. So because of all these reasons, because of the problems that fundamentally stand within South Africa, and because of the fact that we need to start doing something about it, clearly we need to ban alcohol advertising.
To disprove this theory about advertising, what I'll do is just to tell you the brand house story, so that you see what advertising means for economic growth, for new entrants into the economy, and what does it mean as a benefit to the consumer. Brand house is a joint venture of 3 companies. It's Diageo, which is a London-based company, which provides mainly of the spirit portfolio that you spoke about, Johnnie Walker's and Smirnoff. And then this other partner is Heineken, of course provides Heineken and Amstel. And the third partner is Namibian Breweries, which provides then Venlock, draft and lager and so on. It was established in 2004 as a joint venture, building up, started as a very small company with a couple of hundred people. And from 2004, we have seen significant growth of their company. Just to put it simple to you, we started with a turnover of about 600 million, right? That company when it started in 2004. Today we talk of a turnover of 8 billion. That's one company. And in terms of capacity, we started mainly as importers of mainly these global brands that I've mentioned. And we have already invested more than 3.5 billion in local production capacity, creating employment in South Africa. And that has increased our employment rate to about 1,500. Now, over the same period, over the past 10 years, there have not been a significant increase in consumption of alcohol in terms of volume, or in terms of people consuming more. What has happened over the past 10 years is that brand house has grown, taking consumers away from competitors. Other competitors have either declined or remained stagnant over the past 10 years and allowing us to go through this process. Now, what is unique about us as opposed to other players? Also, if I had an opportunity to put a graph here, I will show you the growth of brand house vis-a-vis probably all of the companies. The reason is our marketing approach has understood the progression of people in South Africa in terms of their own economic growth. There have been drastic changes in the economy in South Africa. Many people have moved from low LSM to up to higher LSM with new patterns of buying, new approaches in terms of brand choices and so on. And that has given brand house a great opportunity. We understood that we needed to go travel that journey of economic progress with the consumer. And marketing has been very central in informing consumers in terms of the choices they have to meet their newly acquired economic needs. I mean, we know all of us, a couple of people who come from different social backgrounds. Many of us started probably driving city calls, we moved on to GTI, and we moved up to probably VW, storage, depending on how big your family is. So with us, we have a number of brands that allow the consumer to grow with us and appreciate various levels of their own economic progress. For instance, we'll start a consumer at LSM 125 with the Smirnoff 1818, and that consumer will progress with us to probably Smirnoff Black, probably around LSM 78, and probably move on to the premium whiskeys. But we do agree that indeed we need to invest also on dealing with socio-economic problems in South Africa leading to abuse. And as companies, we are investing on promoting responsible use of alcohol. As brand house, we are using the same marketing tactic. If marketing can make people drink, it can also stop them from irresponsible use of alcohol. And we are focused firmly on promoting responsible or stopping drinking and driving. And with our partners in ARA, we are also expanding that, dealing with issues of alcohol in families and in various scenarios in society to make sure that people are aware of the dangers of alcohol misuse, but also they are able to take appropriate decisions. It is a very expensive exercise to implement this. It's going to cost this country a lot of money. It's going to stop new market entrants and undermine growth in the country.
So while I think Noah really hit on a lot of the major issues in this discussion, I think there are a few specific areas which need to be extended on for us to really completely dominate this debate. And that starts with the idea of culture and what is the drinking culture in our country, and how there are not only the direct effects of advertising which want to be spoken on from that side, but rather there are lots of indirect effects. We're not just dealing with whether or not an advert can draw someone from one product to another, but what does it mean to be a drinker in South Africa, and what does the role adverts have about people who, when they make that initial way up as to whether or not they think drinking is a valid choice, is something that they want to do, and to what degree. However, there are a few initial fallacies which need to be thought about. The first of which is this idea of responsible drinking. And we really don't think there's a link between advertising and responsible drinking on the side. Because if you think about it already, logically, the punishment for irresponsible drinking, for things like driving, are death and imprisonment. Both of those are pretty serious punishments. If you were a rational player, you wouldn't want either death or imprisonment, I would hope. The fact is that people still do it. Having a signboard on the side of the road doesn't change your behavior from fundamentally irrational to rational on the base level. More than that, any of you who've taken a drink know that rationality is not the highest thing on your agenda once you've started drinking. So again, the sign doesn't really help. So we don't think that responsible drinking and advertising are in any way linked. More than that, we think that if this is an industry discussion about, well, it doesn't actually increase the amounts of drinking, it doesn't do anything like that, it's all about inner industry shifts. Again, we don't then really see why growth is related to this, because then the industry as a whole wouldn't be taking a hit if we're going to be having this, because it just wouldn't mean changes within the industry, which is purely trading jobs between one group and another group as one company grows and another declines. We don't really think that's a valid reason to create a social balance. More than that, we think that we don't know why products specifically need advertising to discriminate, to determine what they are in these marketplaces. We think alcohol basically sells itself. You don't have to advertise for the alcohol for people to want it. And more than that, you can price discriminate, you can have other values attached to it. You think about people who want to drink a mojito or whatever, a lot of that's got nothing to do with advertising, but what values they attach to the drink. And that comes into my major thing, which is really about when you make a choice to drink, it's dependent on a dynamic situation of personal and social pressures which make you want to do what you want to do. And the thing here that's specifically important is that while Noah dealt with how those pressures are created specifically directly on you by seeing what you perceive to be a good life attached to certain alcohol adverts. When you see an advert like Black Label saying, look, go ride a helicopter and rescue someone from an ocean, and then have a black label because that's the sort of thing which you deserve for that sort of work. We think that does have a direct effect, and here are the stats to back that up. But more than that, we think more persuasive is, and pervasive to be honest, is the indirect effect it creates. That look, it's socially acceptable to be drinking within society, specifically when you need to be drinking to these degrees, and that what you do is you create a space where alcohol is the accepted norm. And what we can see is why it is that price changes such don't work as a mechanism to stop it. Is because when there is a culture of drinking in a country, having price changes doesn't change that culture. You see in places like Kuwait, where alcohol is in fact banned for sale in most places, there's still huge amounts of drinking in the expat communities because they have a drinking culture. When you see in places like Singapore, where they have massive sin taxes, and a beer will cost you around 125 rand in some places for a draft, there's still a drinking culture amongst the expat communities because they have a drinking culture. What you need to change is the acceptance of whether or not drinking, and specifically drinking excessively, are things which are socially acceptable, which are cool, and can be associated with someone who's a valid member of society. You need to create a scenario where that is not seen as the case. And to do that, while we don't think that the problem might have got specifically worse, we don't think that that problem has got any better. And that's because they've created a scenario which alcohol is still cool, where alcohol is still okay in our country, and there is an active step, specifically from government, to try and shut that down. And if our government isn't leading the way with regards to how we should be perceiving alcohol in our own lives, then who are we to be able to make those decisions for ourselves if we can't look to some sort of position of power as what is and isn't a social good? And so for those reasons, we fundamentally need to ban alcohol. We need advertising. We need to send that message.
I think it's absolutely wonderful that my little colleague over there started by saying he wants to ban alcohol, because it actually sounds but anyway, we're here for advertising. I think the most important thing that you should all realize is that the industry in South Africa and in the world is committed to reducing alcohol abuse and misuse. We believe that alcohol has a role in society for those that choose to consume alcohol beverages, and that those who choose to consume them should do so responsibly. There is no research able to withstand scientific scrutiny that can show that alcohol advertising equals abuse. And I think we have enough data here to go back and forth on this one all night. So I think that's the fundamental issue. There is no link between the two. In terms of what it is we should do, we believe we support government in its desire to reduce alcohol-related harm. How do we do that? And it is much more than just a simple advertising or marketing ban. Alcohol abuse and misuse is a multifaceted problem, and there is no silver bullet solution. And what worries me and what worries us is that if you choose something simplistic like a marketing ban or an advertising ban, shame which would put a lot of you out of work in future, be that as it may, you are actually not dealing with the proper issues. If one looks at what causes abuse and misuse, and I think the best would be to use a quote from Zima Barbie 2 years ago at the first summit on abuse and substance abuse in South Africa. He said, I'm with you and CSAT is with you in trying to reduce abuse. However, if you don't fix education, you don't fix employment, and you don't get that 70% of South Africans under the age of 30 employed, and you reduce that sense of hopelessness, you will never, ever deal with the issues of alcohol abuse. So, dear Minister Matsoaledi, we agree we should reduce abuse. We should agree we should go together, work together. But to simplistically hang your hat on one thing takes away, to my mind, the focus on where the focus should be. And one other thing too, I think is very, very important. My colleagues over there have said that alcohol advertising or marketing is to gain market share. That I agree, absolutely agree with that. Because that is the fundamental shift that you're doing. You're not advertising to people who don't drink, you're advertising to people who do choose to drink to use a specific thing. And I think it's a very, very simple item. Two little simple vignettes on that one. One, 65% of South Africans, 65% according to World Health Organization statistics, do not touch alcohol. 65%. That 65% are as exposed to the ads and the marketing things as the other 35% that do. So tell me, if advertising was so powerful, why do the 65% not? And the other classic one, you say advertising is going to make people drink, or what you're doing, you're advertising drinking, you're not advertising brands. Well, let's think of Lux soap and Palmolive soap. When they are advertising their particular product, are they advertising showering, or are they advertising what you would use when you choose to shower? I think I raised my case.
You spoke a little bit about the glamour and image of advertising alcohol, and I suppose that it's probably okay to accept that that may be a little deceptive. I'm not sure that I ever got to fly in a helicopter after or before drinking a calming black label. But certainly, one concern about this link between advertising alcohol and alcohol abuse, which of course is the problem, not alcohol consumption, but the alcohol abuse, is that it's not clear why advertising a glamorous culture would lead to that alcohol abuse. In fact, it may be that people aspire to a more refined kind of experience as a result of these glamorous adverts. And in fact, I found a study reported in the Daily Maverick that actually suggests that some studies have found that there's a negative correlation between the amount of advertising and the heavy drinking done by heavy users and alcoholics. So why do you think it is that responsible advertising, or glamorous advertising, if you like, actually promotes alcohol abuse?
Well, I'm going to use this mic for this question, so I don't feel like standing up again. So I think the problem here that Tom and I face on this side of the debate is that it's very difficult to scientifically talk about how advertising creates a culture. I think it's very difficult for someone to sit down and do a scientific study that says this study, running different regressions, has created this outcome and this kind of society that we see. Okay? But I do think, and even from personal experience, I think that we all, and I think to a certain extent we can all buy into this. When I watch, for example, adverts talk about Shiller's Regalry, and he talks about men living with honor, for example, I buy into that kind of advertising, and I do find it appealing. So, to a certain extent, okay, I think that we all inherently do relate to alcohol advertising. And when I see people drinking Malibus and having a beach party, my first thought is, oh, I'd love to be there. Now, where that crosses the line from being just drinking alcohol into alcohol abuse is something different. And I'm not necessarily saying that from Tom and I's perspective, that the advertising ban is going to completely stop it. But we do think that it ties into it, and we do think, because it's about creating a culture where people enter into the industry, enter into the perception that drinking is cool, it also means that, well, when you drink too much, you don't have this knee-jerk reaction that what I'm doing is wrong, because if in the first place you think of from a premise, or from the primary point where you started off drinking in the first place, you thought drinking was cool. So we think it's not the be-all and end-all. We do think we need to improve education, create jobs. But at the same time, we've got to get started at some point in order to try and solve the problem.
None of us want laws that can't be enforced. My personal opinion is that we have rather a lot of those laws, too many already in South Africa. And it seems to me that with the advent of digital media and other technologies, a ban on alcohol advertising is going to be extremely difficult for a government to enforce. They would have to scrutinize and regulate Facebook, Twitter, other websites, satellite television, merchandising. Do you really think the South African government could pull that off?
So I seem to have more faith in our government than you, Jimmy. But other than that, I don't think it's ever a really valid reason to say, look, we see something socially negative going on. It'll be really hard to stop it, you know. We might actually have to spend a little bit of money, we might have to put a bit of time to it, someone might have to monitor Facebook, but you know, that sounds like a loss. Let's let people suffer, and let's just let it carry on. So I think the base premise of an unenforceable, like 100% unenforceable rule, and if you can't hit that 100%, you shouldn't implement that law at all, I think is a false premise. I think you should go for the law if you think there's a justification for that law. Enforceability comes afterwards. And with regards to enforceability, I definitely think that there's not something which is unfeasible. France managed to pull off a World Cup and a European Cup in soccer without the help of alcohol advertising. I mean, there's lots of advertising which can happen, and if you put stringent rules about what the possible repercussions of a company playing into that advertising would be, I don't see why the incentive structure of rational groups would be to play into that market if you just make it very clear what's going on. So while yes, there might be some slip-ups, and yes, there might be some issues, I think looking at something like smoking, we don't really see smoking adverts that much. And I think the ban's been pretty effective there. I don't see why it couldn't be carried across to here.
I'd like to ask you, you told an inspiring story about Brandhouse's rise to success, and you know, that must be very pleasing for people within Brandhouse. But it's hard for me to understand precisely why this is a good thing for the country. And before I let you respond, I just want to point out a recent Department of Trade and Industry study which suggests that the profits of the alcohol industry tend to lie in the pockets of the wealthy, and the costs tend to affect the poor. And in fact, SAB Miller, which is one of the biggest companies in the industry, of course, is listed in London, and so in fact the rich people it's making richer are probably not even South Africans.
Well, the issue of profits, you need to look at it in terms of how the whole of the economy in South Africa is transforming. I think all of us as companies are obliged to at least transfer 25% or so to local South Africans, like South Africans, and most of the companies have complied with that. And if you look at the value chain in terms of alcohol, I mean, we support significant amount of agricultural industry, grapes, hops, maize, and even water supply that we put into production of alcohol. And the upstream, that's just the upstream side. And you look at the downstream side, the support that we provide to advertising agencies and if just the media alone, if you ban alcohol today, TV stations are going to lose about 1.3 billion. SABC alone will lose about 600 million. So there is no clear plan in terms of where the money is going to come from to replace that amount of revenue that the downstream is going to lose. I mean, it's taking us back to real isolation. I just imagine South Africans when they sitting down Barcelona and Manchester playing on a UEFA Champions League final, and we can't watch it because our government has decided that we can't watch a championship that is sponsored by Heineken, and it's allowed in Europe, it's allowed across the world. Only China has tried to stop social media and do all kinds of funny things. They have not been successful.
Okay. Adrian, you mentioned earlier that that this alcohol abuse in South Africa, which I was pleased to hear you concede is a real problem, is a multifaceted problem. You said, and you said something like that, saying that we need more than an advertising ban. But of course, saying that you need more than an advertising ban is not to say that you don't need an advertising ban too. So, can you respond to that?
Sure. I think it's quite simple. As I said it right up front to me, we are as keen on reducing abuse as the government is. We just don't believe that there's any definitive proof that an advertising ban is going to have any positive impact, but it'll have lots of negative impacts. Freedom of choice gone. So Barney's mentioned in terms of job loss. And another issue that is, I think, very, very important is this competitive issue. The South African government, in the Liquor Act of 2003, to get a license, you've got to satisfy the minister on 3 basic things. 1, that this license is not anti-competitive. 2, that it promotes black economic empowerment. 3, that you will actually be working to reduce abuse. Now, you ban marketing and advertising. You freeze the market shares of SAB and Distell, and that's the end. This wine that you probably got out here tonight, you wouldn't have had it, because there'll be no way of letting people know that you've got a new product. So there's no ways to come in. And I think that's important. And just to add, I think while money and profits and costs and that are one issue, the contribution of South African industry to GDP in this country 2 years ago was 95 billion rand. So it is a substantial industry that benefits a lot of people in the country. Yes, there are problems, and yes, we must address those problems, but let's not try and find a simplistic solution. Let's look at it overall and see how we can do it.
That we don't want to take the last of those options. We've also seen and heard quite a few arguments about why, in fact, we think that, for example, sending out responsible messages alongside alcohol advertising would possibly be an effective way to reduce the problem. I think comprehensively, we've kind of shown that that's not the case. When you have the majority of an advert telling you something's cool, and a 5-second clip at the end saying it's not, when the punishment, for example, in the law at the moment for drinking and driving is tremendously far worse than an advert or a message at the end of the advert, we don't think that's a valid option. We do think, and Tom and I have said this yet and yet again, there are other reasons for why alcohol is so bad and why it causes so many harms to society. We're happy, let's deal with those. What we are telling you is that alcohol advertising does create a society where we think that alcohol is cool. I know it from my person because when I watch alcohol adverts, I do think the people in them are cool, and I do want to go and enjoy the party that they're having. If that is the case, well, then the obvious thing is that we should ban alcohol advertising. It's starting to make a difference to the gross deaths in South Africa and the exorbitant amount of costs that we're incurring as a society. While may not be in revenue figures, they're exorbitant costs to society in terms of life that we simply can't deal with.
Thank you, Noah. Sibani?
So that I don't leave here with the impression that I can't stand up. And also they are interested in money. Brenda's family believes in ethical conduct. My colleague here has spoken about it in terms of the ARA code on marketing. But in addition to just the industry code, we also have our own code, Brand House Code, which then restricts us in terms of what we do, where we place our adverts. At the back there was a question about targeting the 16 and teenagers. We firmly screen our placement decisions and make sure that we move away from either TV or radio programs that are predominantly children, or 30% or more of the audience is children. But secondly, we do believe that we need to deal with the content also of the adverts themselves to deal with the false illusion issue. We do accept that probably there are certain instances where certain players push the boundaries a bit. We need to find some way of enforcing the rules in terms of self-regulation. And if government also wants to join us in monitoring those ethical conduct, and they want to make sure that we arbitrate accordingly and probably enforce those codes, we can do it together. There is no problem. The issue is whether this advertising is going to take us forward or not. It's not going to help us in terms of economic growth. It's not going to help us in terms of creating work opportunities for South Africa and all over the world. And it's just going to isolate South Africa from the rest of the world.
So, we've all agreed about how we don't like binge drinking, and we don't want these sort of things. And if we could show some sort of scientific data that adverts directly created that, then it would be a no-brainer. We would ban them right away. And the only real sort of particular issue we have about it is because, and the answer to the question of why not, is because there's some sort of direct industry harms specifically and sort of economic growth for jobs. So while I reiterate what I answered to Mark's question, is that while we think that a lot of people who might be losing out in those industries are people who are skilled individuals who can move from one advertising account to another, and if so, they can find some alternate means of getting involved in the economy. And we don't think that that's directly the largest possible harm that can be created. But more than that, I think that the idea of direct scientific needs to show why you create binge drinking is not so much the issue here. It's more about what it is that is positive and okay in society and what isn't. And what becomes okay and when does it stop being okay. And when you see a culture in which alcohol in general is seen as okay, and I know there were comments made about the slip of the tongue where I said we should ban alcohol. Well, I believe we should have freedom of choice. I think it's a disillusion to think that inherently alcohol is a good thing in your society. Inherently, alcohol poisons us, it makes us act irrationally, it affects things like our HIV rates. Why do we have it? We ban things like marijuana, we ban other things which do things like that to our bodies. Arbitrarily, due to historical reasons, we allow alcohol in our society. I think it's time we face the fact that alcohol isn't good for us. any glamorization of alcohol at any level is bad for us. And we should try and create a scenario by those who drink are those who are actively stepping against what is perceived to be in their best interest and society's best interest. We shouldn't be a society accepting and encouraging of drinkers. We should be a society in which drinking is both not the norm statistically, but also what is not believed to be the best for people. And that we should all be able to play a part in that. And advertising definitely has a role there.
Adrian.
Thank you very much. I think the most important thing just to point out, so we got a bit of clarification up front, is the World Health Organization in its global strategy had 10 policy options, one of which was restrictions on marketing, not bans. So even the World Health Organization is not promoting a ban. Realize that too. We must also look at the French model, because that's been used many times. The French model, the Levada Dame, which was almost an absolute ban, except only tombstone in print, has had absolutely no impact. Even the French government has shown that the actual abuse of alcohol, particularly amongst your 18 to 24s, increased dramatically. So that hasn't worked. If you look at the typical countries in the world where there are bans on advertising, the Scandinavian countries, they have the worst drinking records in the world. Once again, World Health Organization statistics. No advertising, but they drink to fall down. I don't know if any of you have been to Scandinavia, but they really are absolutely terrible from a drinking perspective. So, and also a very important point was made by somebody from the floor here, this gentleman here. This is not just advertising ban, this is a marketing ban. So it is a complete blackout. No advertising, no promotions, no events, no sports sponsorship. And remember with tobacco, when tobacco faced a similar thing, MTN and Vodacom were there to pick up the slack. I can guarantee you, in this current economic climate, there is nobody to pick up the slack. So there will be losses at the media owners. There will be losses at the advertising agencies. As I said, maybe not the 3 big players who will push that advertising spend to the bottom line, but there will be losses across the country, not necessarily the companies. And then finally, on this issue of culture, I just don't quite get it. I've already pointed out to you once again, World Health Organization statistics, 65% of South Africans don't drink. So that's not a drinking culture. And I can guarantee you of the 35% that do drink, a lot in this room, even this gentleman who maybe in his younger days had a problem. The majority of people in South Africa who choose to consume alcohol beverages do so responsibly. And it's just logical. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have a society at all. We wouldn't be sitting here tonight. Thank you.